have to learn to divorce what man does from God because it isn't connected. We blame God for man's decision when it's not connected to the source. Oftentimes, it's those people closest to you that you just wouldn't expect because they've been telling you need to change for so long. They just never really wanted you to change because they liked you the way you were. And they needed you the way you were. Most of the time for validation for themselves.
Empower You podcast is devoted to bringing real-world wisdom and encouragement to our listeners, fans, subscribers, and friends. We talk about a multitude of life principles and the process from an economic, societal, and cultural perspective. We believe that in tough conversations and shared wisdom, we can pave the path and leave a ladder for the future. So subscribe to our channel, rate, review, and let us empower you. What's up, friends? If you're anything like me, you realize that eating healthy meals supercharges your productivity and gives you a clear mind so that you can solve more problems at work or in your business. Smile More Meal Prep Service lets you choose from a variety of healthy food options that will fit your dietary needs while putting a smile on your face so you can stop stressing about eating healthy throughout the week and buying lunches because Smile More Meal Prep has got your back. And if you use the promo code EMPOWER, you'll receive 15% off your order. So click the link in the show notes, order your healthy, delicious meals, relax, and smile more. Welcome to Empower You podcast. My name is Kidboy Cooper. I am so excited that you are here. Can everybody see, hear, how we doing out there today? If you're on the live, feel free to say hey. I would love to hear from you. Do share and let everybody else know. We're going to do these weekly where we'll be going live from the Facebook page so that everybody can kind of join in and we can have some really great conversations, especially as new series kind of roll out. So I'm really excited about this today. I think this is going to be absolutely incredible. So without belaboring the point too much, let's talk about our topic. So for any of you who are new to Empower You podcast, my name is Kidboy Cooper, and I've been doing Empower You podcast for a little bit now. We've got this will be our 93rd episode, and what we've been focusing on here lately is men, right? And the challenges that men face as we progress towards being our fullest selves, right? Living up to your full potential, stepping into your purpose or your calling, what you feel like you're supposed to do with your life. And there's a lot of different things that affect those decisions and that process of maturing and of becoming who it is you desire to be. And so we've been digging deep into the unique problems, the unique challenges that men face. And so in this episode, we're going to be talking about developing character. Okay. Developing character is super important, especially in today's society with everything moving as fast as it is and the oversharing that happens. And so I have a tremendous guest with me today who is a youth minister. He's an audio video director. He serves in various different capacities with his church and also in the community. His name is Jack Fitzpatrick III. He's an absolutely incredible guy. We had a pleasure of being on an interview series over at Commerce UR Community Church where he serves. And I really listened to some of the analogies that he gave, as well as his understanding of some of the challenges that we face as human beings, and then especially as men. And so, you know me, like I had to see if he would spend a little time with us on the podcast. So I want you all to welcome Mr. Jack Fitzpatrick III to Empower You podcast. What's up, bro? How are you?
What's going on? How you doing, sir?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being here, man. I understand you're busy. You got all kinds of stuff going on. But I really appreciate you being here, bro. Seriously.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that our topic for today, rather, is developing character, which is very important. We can't get far if our character is out of place, right? We just kind of continue to roll backwards on ourselves. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us about yourself and where you're from, what you do, as we start to dive into this topic, because I got some questions.
Okay. Name's Jack Fitzpatrick. I was born in Nashville, Tennessee. We moved here when I was 4, 5, so I was raised here mainly. Been here all my life, most of my life. Mom and dad are ministers of the gospel, so I was kind of born and raised, bred in the church. So that's my background. It's very biblical. I've always walked that path, but because the foundation was laid, I came back to that.
Right. Well, that's awesome, man. So, when we were both interviewed on that video series, you really talked passionately about your return to your faith and to how you allowed your calling, your purpose to impact the people around you and cause you to be a servant leader. Can you tell me a little bit about what that journey was like for you?
Yeah, well, I never didn't believe. Let's start there. I've always believed, but I wasn't walking in that belief. I wasn't walking in the faith that I believed. So I say I went astray. So I was out in the world doing what we do when we are out and about in the world, just like everyone else. I wasn't any different. Drinking. I didn't really smoke, but I indulged in some things. Sexual activities, all of these sort of things that come with living that fleshly, worldly life. But when I got to Come As You Are, I was in college. I just graduated high school, just got to college. So when I came to Come As You Are under the tutelage, shepherdhood of Pastor Anthony Payton, who's still the pastor to this day. And almost as soon as I got there, he started telling me I had a calling to preach. And I didn't believe it, never thought about it, didn't want to preach. And he would tell me almost every time he saw me that I had a calling. And this went on for 8 years, and I would always tell him he was wrong for 8 years straight. Every Sunday. And he never pushed me, he never pressed me about it, but he always planted the seed. He never let that die. He never let me just go about my business. So I had somebody who was dedicated into discipling me. But I needed that worldly experience to know that there was nothing out there for me. So I had to go through that journey of walking outside of the faith per se, in order to realize I needed the faith.
Right.
So once I came back for the wrong reason. I came back, I would say. I came back for a girl. It ended up being the right decision, even though I came back for the wrong reason. And that set me on this path. And me getting back, from the first time I walked back in the doors, I knew that this is where I was supposed to be. And soon after that, a month or two after I came back, I realized he might have been right 8 years ago. I might actually have a calling. And I surrendered when I came back. But it was the world that pushed me back to that.
Yeah. I think that's really, really great. And I think one of the things that you said that struck me is that sometimes we can feel, for you, it's ministry, right? But for some people, it may be something totally different. For some people, you may be an artist or you may have all these different things going on. But the pull that you have, there's a desire that you have to be used or to be helpful in a certain way. And for me, I allow my podcast to serve as my extension of giving of myself. I try to gather as many people and perspectives that I really wish I had growing up, because I believe I'm supposed to be that bridge. I'm supposed to stand in the gap in that particular way. And so it plays out as a podcast, right? It plays out as me doing social media and stuff. It plays out as me, going and speaking and ultimately reaching thousands of people. But again, what you said was you were resistant to it at first. And one of the things that I think is important to discuss is how men, because of an opinion that we have of ourselves, and our need to protect ourselves, I think sometimes our opinion of ourselves can be a direct, can cause direct resistance to who it is that maybe we're supposed to be or we could be, because we're guarded. Do you feel like, my question is, what was your earliest opinion of yourself, and how do you feel like that played into your life as you grew up, and then ultimately went to school and into where you are right now?
Yeah, well, for me, but I think also for most people, the resistance comes from your circumstances and your life that you've had. For me, I was resistant to the call because I had a mother and a father who were called. And I saw what that did to the family and to them. But also I mean, my upbringing, I was raised right, but I was also raised by a father. We have to tell the truth in order to set people free. But I was raised by a father who didn't always act in that calling at home. And so for me to see someone who can preach with power and what I thought was authority on Sunday mornings and act differently at the house, I didn't want to be a part of that. And so for me, I was damaged to that walk because I saw it personally, what was happening behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And I could not wrap my head around how you could be called, but you can act contrary to your calling. And so for me, I had a distorted view of what that was, of what the ministry looked like, of what was embedded in me that I didn't know what surfaced years later looked like. Because what I saw firsthand from my father, whom at one point was a superhero to me, I saw someone who went away from that calling when they weren't in the pulpit. And for me, that damaged me when somebody finally got to me and told me that I had a calling.
Yeah.
And I was like, no. So for me, I ran back inside myself and I was, no, I don't want that because I know what that did to my father.
Wow.
And so it was damaging for me because I came from an experience where the calling wasn't true. It wasn't pure for me. That's my story. And so I lived out the calling through someone else. And so now I'm getting told that I have a calling. And in my head, I'm going to walk in their calling, not mine.
Yes, got you. That's really good. I want you to explain when you say calling, for those who may not be spiritually inclined, for people who use totally different language to describe their spirituality, who just are of different walks of life. Explain to me what a calling is. Explain to our audience what they could discern or determine how they would determine what a calling is and how it's playing out in their life.
Well, your calling is your purpose. Your calling is being picked by God for a specific design walk. Mine is ministry. That isn't to say that you don't have a job to do, that you don't go to work. That's a separate entity in itself. But your calling is your purpose, what God has ordained and picked for you to do. And mine happens to be ministering the gospel. For others, it might be deacon. For others, it might be running the sound system. For others, your calling might be discipleship, missionary, sitting on the motherboard. Like, everybody's calling is differently, but it's different. But the calling is whatever God handpicks you to do for him. It's your purpose for him.
Absolutely. And I think I'm glad you clarified, because for some of us, at least for myself, one of the things that I struggled with was trying to adapt my life to everybody else's identity and language and things like that. And the reason why I asked about, what is a calling? What does that mean? And I think you broke it down so eloquently. It's the gifts that you have. The thing that God, that the universe, however you want to interpret that, designed you uniquely to do. And that can play out in a lot of different ways. But either way, you have to be sensitive to it. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult for you to reach the level of fulfillment that you truly desire. Even in your case, when you run from it, right? When you avoid it at all costs. And I want to go back to something that you said. You said that what you saw growing up, your lived experience, impacted the way that you interpreted your own purpose, your own calling, the things that you were uniquely gifted at. Can you tell me a little bit about some of your role models or people who you looked up to as a child? Or was, Pops the superhero? And then when that kind of, when your eyes became a little bit more open, you had a little bit more understanding, it just kind of damaged you towards authority figures going forward?
Well, a little bit of both. Because my father, I had my father growing up. So that was my superhero until my eyes got open and I started to see things that were contrary to who he was telling me that we were supposed to be, that who he was supposed to be. So it put a bad taste in my mouth for male role models specifically. But there were two men who just poured into me. One, I just had the pleasure of preaching at his church Saturday. He was a middle school teacher, and he was the girls' basketball coach. And we often scrimmaged with the girls being on the boys' basketball team. And he would always tell me that I had potential in middle school. I used to get in trouble a lot. And he would tell me, he was like, you got too much potential to always be in trouble. And as a young Black man, you're supposed to be the example. He said, you're supposed to set the example. And he told me this for the 3 years that I was in middle school. Almost every time that he saw me, almost every time I was in trouble. And I've never forgotten that to this day. And then there was one other man when I got to high school who was at my church, and he was an usher. He was a lead usher. And when we started a youth usher board, he headed it. And he had a gentle spirit, and he had a big giving heart, and he poured into me in a gentle way. He wasn't one of those vibrato men that just had to be macho all the time. He just sat with me and taught me quietly, and he just walked the walk. And so he set the example because he never wavered. And even in his anger, he would express why he was hurt and why he felt the way he felt and why whatever I did made him feel the way he felt and why he was upset with me. He never lashed out and never cast me away. So those two men set the stage for me. And then there was one more man in the summertime. My mom's a teacher. So in the summertime, she's not working. She would run a church summer camp program. And there was this other man who ran another camp across town. And still to this day, me and him talk, I call him my uncle. And for some reason, he gravitated toward me, and we built a bond and relationship. And it just so happens that he's a pastor of his own church. But at that time, he wasn't.
Right.
But he walked a walk that represented a walk that I wanted to walk one day. And he poured into me, being, several years older than me. He poured into me all these morals and ethics that I would need to become the future man that I will become.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's great. I think, what stuck out to me when you were just speaking was just that the gentle approach that the role models that you have taken in your life, and how that has allowed you to learn. I think for men, I think one of the first errors that we make is that we assume that all boys need this harsh discipline, that all boys need this iron hand over their life to keep them in check or something, to tighten them up, and don't get me wrong, I do believe discipline is important. Everything in the universe has discipline. The sun is never late to come up. The moon never gets out of orbit. Everything has a discipline. There is a rhythm to life, and so I do believe in discipline. However, I believe that there's a lot of trauma that we trap in this idea of being disciplined. There's a lot of trauma that we transfer onto our sons and onto our nephews and even our friends from this rigid idea of what manhood looks like. And when you talked about these really incredible men who understood how to, one, guide you in a way that wasn't bruising, but then also how to demonstrate to you what it looks like to be upset, what it looks like to be sad, what it looks like to be on your, in your peak game, what it looks like to serve. These are very complex, nuanced approaches to the male identity. And I feel like a lot of times none of those things are portrayed in the media. I feel like a lot of times, men are constantly told that we traumatized everybody, which, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of trauma that has happened throughout history from men. And so I don't diminish any of those things. However, I do believe it's important that we take the time to reinforce the positive attributes that come from being compassionate, that come from being sensitive to the movings of other people. And I think those are the things that define you as a person. My question to you, or my next question to you is how would you define character? How would you define developing character in you as a young man? Because you had a lot of great role models, but now characters, when you're putting these things together, when you're exercising these invisible principles, how would you define character as a young man as you experienced it?
Well, character is personality. But even past that, character is what you do when nobody else is watching. That's what I've been taught.
Yeah.
So how you act, what you say, the things you do when no eyes are on you, is your true character. Is who you truly are. You develop that character by examining yourself, by having a set of beliefs, by having principles, morally and ethically and spiritually. And not just having them, but walking in those principles. It's one thing to have principles. It's another thing to walk it. It's one thing to have knowledge. It's another thing to apply the knowledge.
Right.
So I think you have to develop your character by examining yourself. You have to know who you are. You have to know all of your insecurities and insufficiencies. You have to know what makes you tick. You have to know your strong suits. You have to know your weak points. And all of these things play a part. You have to know the desires of your heart. You need to know all of these things. And all of these things play a part ultimately into your character, who you become and what you want to become.
Thanks for listening to Empower You Podcast. I want to take a second and tell you about a service I've been using that has literally changed my life. Akita Ricks, the founder of SoarYourScore.com, helped me erase negative items on my credit score, provided me a clear path to improving my credit, and raised my score by 100 points in the first 90 days. Like, whoa. The best part about all of this is all I had to do was follow instructions. Now, if you're like me and you need a credit bestie, you need to click the link below and schedule your absolutely free discovery call today. Tell them Kid Boy sent you. I think that's a lot though, for young men. I think, I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot for men in general. I think the idea of spending that much time learning just about yourself is not, does not create any tangible, right, value. It doesn't get you any validation, nor are you honored for the amount of time you spend by yourself. And so I think, for young men, what would you suggest they start to implement to help them start to define or really investigate who it is they really want to be, what they actually like and enjoy, what is actually causing them the most pain, what are they insecure about? I think sometimes, especially, and I keep saying young men, let me clarify this. First of all, I truly believe in our young men, and I believe they have more potential than anyone. But I also know that there's a lot of wounded adult men who are, our age and up. I'm 31, and up, and I think for some of us, we have gotten so used to trying to be providers or have these images and things like that, that we really just have no idea who we are outside of the persona that we portray to other people. And so my question is, what would you advise, young people, young men in general who are watching this live, who will watch this live later, what can they start doing? What did you start to do to figure out who you were and what you liked and what your insecurities were?
Unplug. You have to unplug. You have to unplug from social media. You have to unplug from your phone. You have to unplug from your TV. You have to unplug from friends and family. You have to unplug from those outside voices. There can only be one median voice if you truly want to become a certain man or a certain woman, but specifically, since we're talking about men, a certain man. But when you have all these outside sources feeding you, and they're not feeding you the same thing, then you become a whole lot of different things. So you have your TV telling you one thing, you have Facebook telling you another thing, you have your friends telling you to hang with them and be like this, you got your family telling you to be like that, you got your girlfriend telling you to be like this, and you got your job telling you to do this. And so you have 6, 7, 10, 20 different entities all pulling you in a certain direction and all requiring you to be a different person.
That's good.
And you can't unplug from all of those things, but most of them you can. And so we have to learn to shut things out and shut things off. So we have to learn to unplug. We have to learn to unplug from the world sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that. And it doesn't have to be extensive. It can be an hour or two a day here and there. It doesn't have to be for days and weeks at a time. It starts off in small increments. I started off, I would just cut off everything for an hour and I would spend time with God. That was the thing that I needed for me. And I think for most of us, that's what we need, is to know the Creator, ultimately.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
But I unplugged for an hour. No TV, no phone. I would make sure I put my phone in a different room on vibrate so I couldn't even hear it. Because I knew as soon as I heard a ding, I was getting up and I was running to it, because that's what we're programmed to do.
Yeah.
Take our phone in the bathroom, in the shower with us. Like, it's ridiculous. And so I learned to unplug. And in the unplugging, I started to have to look at myself, because I was the only voice I could hear now. Mine and God. And in that quiet time, God can tell you a whole lot about yourself.
That's big. That's big, man. That's big. You said in the quiet time, God can tell you a whole lot about yourself. You said you need to unplug from all the other entities that have their own expectations of you, which could include family, friends, jobs, school, church, being a father. I think there's a lot of pressure, and I understand that women face pressure as well. but I think it's just different as a man to try to be, and especially as somebody when you're trying to be a good person, right? And I think more times than not, a lot of men are just trying to keep up with other people's expectations. And they do so through various means of coping and things like that, because the expectations you live up to don't necessarily satisfy who you truly desire to be. And so that's where I believe, you get all the drinking, you get all the partying, you get all because you're trying to satisfy your actual soul and spirit, even though you're fractured in so many different directions. And so you just bury it all in various habits and things like that. So, another thing that I think is an obstacle for men to encounter is the uncomfortable conversations that come from deciding who it is you want to be. Mm-hmm. From shutting all the voices off. Because what they don't tell you is that the longer you spend actually getting to know yourself, you get less and less concerned with how everybody else feels about you. Mm-hmm. And that's a dangerous place, because people don't like you. People will not like you when you don't play into their trauma. People will not like you when you don't satisfy their need for drama or whatever. And so with all of these things, just be honest, even in the worst situations, there's a certain amount of validation you get. Yeah. And so tell me about, some of the uncomfortable situations that you've experienced when you decided, this is Jack, I'm gonna be me, and I'm not worrying about how everybody else is gonna perceive me. I'm just gonna do what makes me happy and what I feel like I'm designed to do, what my purpose is.
Well, I think the most uncomfortable thing about that is realizing that when you have changed for the better and are trying to become a better person, it is oftentimes the people that is closest to you that you don't think would ever be or have a problem with you becoming the person that God intends for you to be, that oftentimes don't appreciate the person that you're becoming for God. Oftentimes it's those people who have been in your corner forever. Oftentimes it's the person that you share your bed with, it's family, it's the best friend that you've had for 20 years. And oftentimes it's not even a conversation, it's just their disappearance. And they gradually come around less and less. And they start being dependable less and less. And you stop being able to confide in them because they're nowhere to be found when you need someone to talk to, because this is the person you trust. And oftentimes it's those people closest to you that you just wouldn't expect, because they've been telling you need to change for so long. They just never really wanted you to change because they liked you the way you were. And they needed you the way you were, most of the time for validation for themselves.
You better say that. Listen, when I tell you, first of all, you're right on the money, because it really is interesting how many people you think should be okay and even support the moves that you make, who don't, who you would think have been listening to you for years, who have actually heard, the desires that you've had in your heart. But when it comes time to execute, and when you begin to execute and move forward, they're some of the first ones who have a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's really very, very interesting. So, do you think that young men lack character today, or do you feel like they're afraid of the backlash they'll receive if and when they truly decide to be who they feel like they're meant to be, which could be totally different than the persona that they've created and or their lived experience has impressed on them.
I think that might be a combination of both. I think they lack character, but I also think that they are trying to live in the character of what we see nowadays in the world. That goes back to that unplugging. I think that social media and TV has conditioned them to be this new era of man. So that's what they're going with, not realizing that the lack of character that comes with that, that it doesn't hold any moral or ethical or spiritual standard to walk that walk. And so most of the time nowadays, you see every young man trying to be a rapper. Nothing wrong with rap if that's the gift that you have, but that's not for everyone. And it's often, not the lifestyle the rappers themselves are living. And so when you see that all day, every day, not realizing that's not the lifestyle, they're just rapping that to you, speaking that to you, you start to walk in that not knowing that that's not even a reality for most of us. So it lacks character, but they're also trying to build their character based on a character that is portrayed to them.
That's really good. That's really good. You said, a lot of young men, you see, trying to be rappers or ultimately emulate some level of identity that they found online. I think that is really profound because whether it is, rap or sports or, whatever it is that you aspire to be, what you said about the perception we have of these personalities is often very, very different from the reality, the real experience of living in those conditions. And that's why it's so important to know who you are, because from the space of your own knowing and own assuredness in your identity, you can totally go and become a music artist or a rapper or whatever like that. But you'd be moving from a sense of your own power, not just trying to emulate something that you really have no idea what's real or not, especially in social media and things like that. And in many cases, what I see, as I continue to go through this business owner entrepreneurship world, I meet different people, different personalities that you see online. I meet some of these people who have all these millions of dollars or lots and lots of huge communities or like I meet them and they're not who you expect. Sometimes it's absolutely amazing and they are just so much more genuine and authentic than you even just thought they would be. And then other times they're just so awkward and they can only really speak in sound bites. And so that's the way that they communicate, in these small sound bites. And so I think, just to agree with you, I really support young men, men in general, giving things a shot. Whatever it is you feel like you're meant to do, try it. It might seem absolutely ridiculous to somebody, but you got to know for yourself that you're willing to look ridiculous to stand on who you are. You're willing to lose it all to be yourself. You're willing for friends and other people to write you off because you're living your own truth. And when you talk about unplugging and allowing things to dissipate and confronting the fact that people just aren't going to like you sometimes, I think that's really, really impactful. Who do you feel like as a man, as an adult now, who do you feel like you gravitate towards maybe not necessarily on social media, but just in general? Like, what interests do you feel like have that you didn't know you had start to flourish now that you have started to really create and develop your own character?
100% my pastor. I mean, people gotta understand, my pastor came from the drug life, sold it and used it, went to jail, all of these things. But if he doesn't tell you his story, you will never know that. I mean, he has one of the most brilliant minds that I've ever encountered. I mean, there isn't hardly a subject that I've ever heard talk about that he doesn't know most things about. Most books that you bring to the table, he's already read or already has. And the way that his mind is able to hold things. And so when I surrendered to God, I wanted that type of depth of knowledge, because it's in that depth of knowledge where God can use you in a multitude of ways. And so I wanted to be able, I didn't have a desire to read, but being around him so much drove me to read more. I couldn't have conversations with him because I was scared to have conversations with him. I didn't know anything. I gotta start reading. I gotta do something. I can't just sit here and listen, and then he asks me a question. I'm like, and I'm still like that in some ways now, but I'm better at having conversations with him now because I'm more confident, because I have information to pull on. Not a plethora, but I have some. But watching him diligently strive to be better and be more, and he's 60-something odd years old, and he's still trying to gain new knowledge, even biblically. He's been a pastor for 26 years, but in ministry longer than that, and he still take a new theology, doctrinal class anytime there's something that he may not know, something new that comes up. And that type of drive to be better for God and being around it every day, it rubbed off. And so I had a mentor close to me who already had fed into me for so long. And then when I was able to be around him in this close capacity, I couldn't be around him that much and it not rub off.
Yeah, that's really great. That's really great. I think, the thing that rings out to me about this entire or your entire development process is the fact that, it's two parts. It's one, you shut off things. You unplugged from certain things. But through unplugging, you also have given space. And I need men, women, especially men, to understand, by unplugging, you're allowing space for new and better information, influences, and people in your life. And when you talked about just being in proximity to someone who was always striving to be their best, not better than nobody, their best. I think that is huge. Competition is important. Men like to compete. People like to compete. I understand that. But if you're not competing against yourself, if you only can turn it on when somebody is squaring up with you, but you can't turn it on enough to get up every day, you can't turn it on enough to actually chart out a path for yourself and go for it, that proximity to someone who truly desires to be their best is just such a refreshing environment. And you can't intake that kind of energy, that type of mentorship, if you're constantly plugged in.
No, because hold on, let me pause right here, because my pastor shares his pulpit with anybody. He's not one of those who is stingy with his pulpit. He lets everyone who God tells him to come preach. And we've had some awesome people come as you are. He's never not been who he was supposed to be. because someone else was around. He's never thrown shade on them, any of that. He allows them to use the gifts that God has given them. And so he doesn't lead with a competitive spirit. And that sets the tone for me, realizing that I didn't need to compete with everyone else who had a gift like mine. I didn't need to compete with my pastor when I started preaching, because he's been preaching 30 years and I've only been preaching a year, and I can't preach as good as him. I didn't need to compete with the other associate ministers that's on the bench, because they've been preaching longer than me and they can preach better than me. I only needed to be better than I was the last time. And because he doesn't portray that competitive spirit, and he shares his pulpit generously, because ultimately it's not his, it's God's. He just is the shepherd over it. Because he doesn't walk in that, I've learned to not worry about anyone else's gifts. I just try to get the most out of mine.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so good. We really praise this hyper competitive male image, this
Absolutely.
alpha male image, which to me is just hilarious at this point, because as a growing and getting older man, I realize most of this is just hype. This is just hype. I understand there's all these people around and you want to talk loud, but bro, relax. You should have talked that loud yesterday when you ain't had nothing going on for yourself. We wouldn't even be in this situation if you had any real sense. But now you want to be all boisterous, like, I just think we praise this violent, dominant male image. And I don't feel like most men truly desire to be like that, especially with the amount of trauma that men receive as growing up in environments, especially black men too. I think more men desire safety than they really want to let on. I think more men desire peace than they really let on. But because there's no space, because people haven't unplugged enough from all these personas to realize that peace is the ultimate currency, that peace is the ultimate platform, because everybody needs it and everybody is rejuvenated from it. That I think young men especially just get swallowed up in all of, and that's why I love how you said, unplugging is the first step, to really realizing what and developing your real character, because everything else, you're just copy and pasting, know. And these folks ain't real. Like, man, it's really interesting to me seeing things from this perspective. Because when I was 20, when I was 25, 27, 28, 30, there were certain things I just did not understand. And I was living life based off of the understanding that certain things were important. And as I get older, I realize it's not. It's just not. Just like point blank period. It's not. So what do you feel like, and I'm gonna let you go here, what's one thing you wish, you knew sooner that created a massive shift in your life?
What's one thing I wish I knew sooner that created a massive shift in my life? Oh, the sooner I surrender to God is the sooner that I can walk in my purpose. I mean, that's it. Like, I mean, it took me I was 28 to surrender to God. And before that, I had a career that I thought, I was supposed to be in and was in love with. But I was making a whole lot of money, and I was drowned out. I was running dry. My emotions were just dry. I wasn't who I was supposed to be. It wasn't until I surrendered to God and started to walk this walk where I really found peace and joy. And it is that, if I had knew that a day sooner, forget 10 years. If I had knew that a day sooner, I would be further than what I am today. If I had knew it a second sooner, but let alone if I had knew that when I was a boy. Yeah. If I had knew that when I was, still under my mother and father's roof, I might not have made most of the mistakes that I've made as I grew into the man that I am today. Now, I needed all of those things to get to this point. But if I hadn't knew that then, I wouldn't have bumped my head 100 times before I got to this point. So for me, it was just surrendering to God.
That's really good, man. That's really good. I think, one of the things that really comes back to me is that the fact that you said, your lived experience gave you a different perception of church, of faith, of all these different things. And I think it's worth addressing, that for many men, many of us have not had the best relationship with church, the best relationship with God, the best relationship with authority figures in general, based off of abuse, based off of neglect, based off of this idea that boys are to be these hard things. And it's really damaging. And so I think it's really interesting that you say that, you personally had to get to that conclusion. And even though it would have changed things for you sooner, you had to understand for yourself, develop your own experience with God, with your creator, with your purpose, in order to truly appreciate and come into the knowledge that you are now, which I believe, helps you pastor, right? Helps you minister because of the journey that getting your own experience that's not, based in somebody else's reality, not based in somebody else's trauma, not based in somebody else's shortcomings. I just think that's really, really valuable. I think that's really valuable. You were going to say something, brother?
Well, yes. So you said something at the beginning that I wanted to kind of clarify, that there's a vast difference between church hurt from church people, and hurt from God.
Okay.
Most of the time we take church hurt and being hurt from church people as hurt from God.
Yeah.
And that isn't necessarily, not necessarily, that isn't true. Just because somebody claims to represent God does not mean that it is from God. And we have confused that, and just because we got hurt from somebody at the church or hurt from a church specifically, we blame God for that.
Right.
And that isn't true. That isn't God, that's man. And so we have confused the two things. Not to say that your circumstances or your situation are any less valid and are any less painful.
Right.
But we blame God for something that we do in the flesh. And so we have to learn to divorce what man does from God, because it isn't connected all the time. Right. And that's what we do. We blame God for man's decision when it's not connected to the source.
That's a great clarification. And I think, as I reflect listening to you, I agree with that. I think because of our pain, which again, is valid, we assume that pain came from God or the source, however you want to say that. But in reality, the pain we experience comes from people and or circumstances that are just out of our control. And so, especially, certain traumas and things growing up, more times than not, you didn't have any control over that. And so I just think I appreciate you for clarifying that, because for men who struggle, with their faith, or even being open to their faith. Nobody's telling you, for any of those men listening, I understand that, I'm a podcaster, I produce podcasts, so maybe you don't want to listen to me. Maybe you got some stuff around, Jack being a minister and an AV production specialist and all these different hats that he wears. But I think it's important that we acknowledge, brother, whatever it is that you're going through and that you're dealing with, that something or somebody did to you, that doesn't reflect your value to God, to the community. Don't allow everyone else's perceptions of you to determine how you feel about yourself. That's a part of that unplugging that you mentioned, Jack, that is just so important. As men, we take on everyone else's opinion of our value. And we carry that. We try to bury it in making more money or, getting more women or getting more status. But internally, we take on these ideas that other people have about us, and they eat away at what we believe our value is. Even when people are woofing and trying to act like they're not, it's quite obvious, like you can't walk out the house without 1,000 chains on, bro. That's where you feel like you're valuable. It's just it's apparent. You're wearing it. And I'm not knocking nobody that likes jewelry and stuff like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we can subconsciously start to devalue ourselves because of the things that we have gone through. And when you devalue yourself, you ultimately don't understand your divine role and what God is doing on the planet. What your purpose is in the grand scheme of things. So I'm so glad that you said that. It's just like, those are not the same thing. What hurt you is what hurt you. That doesn't mean, that's great, bro.
But that also, exactly what you just said. But that goes with, because we have a skewed view of who God is, and so we think that everything is from God just because it has His name on it, and that is the truth. Most of us don't know the God of the Bible. Most of us don't open our Bible and get to learn about Him ourselves, how He revealed Himself. Most of us just go off of he say, she say. What our mama and daddies told us, what our friends told us, what other ministers at the church told us. So most of us don't truly know the God of the Bible. We know the God of the person sitting next to us, or the God of the person that we share the bed with, or the God of one of our coworkers. We don't really know this relational God of the Bible, how He revealed Himself in Scripture. And so when you don't open your word to know who He is and what He said about Himself, you'll get confused about your value because you don't know Him, so you don't know what He says about you. And if you don't know Him, how can you know what He thinks and what He says about you? And so you'll always miss your value of who God says you are when you don't even know who He is.
Absolutely. There's so much in there that I want to unpack, bro. There's so much, because I think there's so many facets to that. I think there's so many facets to just faith in general and how it looks for different people. But I think it goes back to what you said, to understanding the relational aspects of your faith. I think that is so important. You also said people really don't know their faith. They just know whatever their parents gave them or their grandparents gave them, or they haven't really defined or figured out for themselves and taken the time to learn who God is for them and how God is speaking to them. I know for me, at least, you grow up with a lot of different ideas on everything that you should be doing. But when that's not what your calling is, you constantly have this conflict. You're just well, all of the things that I feel drawn to do don't seem to be acceptable or valued here. So what do I do with that? You know? And I think that's going back to that relationship. I think that's so important when you're developing your character. So one last thing, for any of y'all who are listening, first of all, this has been an incredible conversation. Oh my goodness. It's just about time to go. But I want to encourage you all who are listening to follow Jack Fitzpatrick III, follow Empower You podcast, share this with somebody who you believe would be encouraged, uplifted, empowered by it. But then also take some time to develop your own relationship with God, with yourself, and start to develop your own character. You know, if you're a man out there and you're suffering from some hurt, from some trauma, it's imperative that you take time to yourself. And as we are starting to wrap up, I just want to make sure that, you know, that's in the forefront of your mind, even before we do our very last segment of the podcast interview. So, bro, you're incredible. Thank you so much for your insight.
I mean, thanks.
You're fantastic.
Thank you.
At the end of every interview, we do what are called thought exercises. And so on our thought exercises, it's basically an opportunity for you, the guest, to leave something personal, leave a book, a scripture, maybe a practice that you have that really helps you get through your lowest points, right? When you don't feel like Jack, when you don't feel like you know who you are, or you're having a significantly challenging day, something that helps you recenter and pulls you back into yourself. You know, I've had over 90 something thought exercises, and these are still my absolute favorite part of the podcast. So, if you're ready, you know, the floor is yours, Van. Would love to get a thought exercise from you.
Yeah, so my thought exercise actually comes from one of my favorite, who is now deceased. I call him theologian, R.C. Sproul. He's a minister of the gospel. There's this concept called Coram Deo, and it means living before the face of God. And whenever I find myself going through hard times, I mean, I do this every morning. I try to get in God's personal space every morning. I try to pray, and I do it throughout my day whenever I have a hard time. But at my lowest points, at my hardest times, I find where I am most comforted is when I am before God, when I am in my word, where I am in prayer, where I am meditating on the things of God, on who He is, and who He's called me to be, and who He's designed me to be. Because it is in being in His word where I can pull on things that I may have read some time ago in order to minister to me in that moment. It is in prayer that the Holy Spirit intercedes for my needs, even when I don't know exactly what they are. And it is in that meditation where I can focus on the things of God. So I diligently try to live my life in this concept of Coram Deo, living before the face of God. And I would encourage everybody else to try to live, and not try, but do live in the face of God, before the face of God.
And how would you implement that? Like, so for somebody who's super new, and maybe they don't, maybe they don't read the Bible very much. Maybe that's not necessarily their thing, but they have a desire to grow a relationship with God, with their Creator, to grow past their previous traumas and how would you encourage somebody who is maybe not from the church world to implement Coram Deo?
Yep. Pray.
Okay.
Pray and tell God the truth. Tell Him exactly who you are. Tell Him exactly what you're going through. Tell Him exactly what you need from Him. And tell Him that you surrender to who He is. Tell Him that you believe in Him, but you don't know what that consists of. But you want to know what that consists of.
Right.
You want to know how to walk that life that he wants for you. And then past that, you have to, open your Bible. You have to start somewhere.
Right.
I think that was the hardest thing for me when I surrendered, was taking on the Bible. Praying was easy. I can do that whenever, wherever, for me. But opening my Bible was the hard part, because there's a lot of heavy, hefty stuff that makes absolutely no sense. But until you open it and dive in it, it'll never make sense. And so you have to open it and start. Yeah. Otherwise, it will continue not to make sense.
And there's a lot of tools, apps, and things like that
Absolutely.
that can help you start to implement different things.
And then ask for mentors. Ask for mentors. Ask for people who know about the relational God and can help you and direct you and lead you. You can't do it all on your own.
Absolutely.
There hasn't been a man to do it all on their own. Even the first man created, Adam, God gave him Eve. So no one can do it all on their own. So ask God to send you mentors and people who are more mature in the faith to lead you.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Quam Deo. That's dope. Wow. Okay, y'all. Y'all got your marching orders for this next week. Take some time to pray and just express what's on your heart. Let it all out. I think one of a really powerful thing that you said was that sometimes you really don't know what being a better person, what developing character, what self-development, what seeking God, what walking in your purpose or your calling. All these terms can feel super abstract, but there's something that you desire, and there has to be a better way than what you're currently experiencing. And you said to be honest and say that I don't know what this entails, but I want it.
Yep.
And I think that's a really important part of what you said, because at least in my own experience, more will present itself the more open you are to it. And if you just start with that basic prayer, like you said, that's why I think that's so powerful. It's just just start there. Just start there. Just asking God, asking your creator, however it is you pray. You may like to walk in the woods and pray, whatever it is, but start, but just find a space to be that vulnerable and to surrender to those things. Even though you don't fully understand what all of that stuff entails. That's super powerful, man. If you're a young man out here and you growing and you're trying to figure out what you need to do, that is a fantastic thought exercise that you can do anywhere, all the time, especially in difficult moments, because the more you open yourself up, the more you'll find, the more that will find you. And so, yeah, man, that's fantastic. You got any books you writing or any podcasts you starting or essays
I think a podcast might be coming in the next year. I haven't fully wrote the whole concept out, but sometime maybe within the next year. Okay. I got some things in the works.
Oh, bet. But you got to let me know, man.
I will, man. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Y'all, thank you all so much for listening, for watching, for sharing, for participating. Thank you so much, Jack, for being here. God bless you. To all of you all who are listening, I truly appreciate you. Thank you for being a part of Empower You podcast. We will be back next week for another live episode on Facebook. Thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you, brother, for having me.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. So y'all take care. I will see you all next week. Peace. Thanks for listening to Empower You podcast. Don't forget to rate and review this episode, because we would love to hear your takeaways from this discussion. And it helps us reach more listeners just like you. If you'd like daily audio video clips from the podcast, you can find Empower You podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.